when I think about resource sharing, I also think about power sharing. And I think in the outdoors, there's a lot of gatekeeping that happens either around places that are accessible to get to, skills, having someone to go outside with so that you feel less scared and you have some safety in numbers or community. And so I also think in my personal life about that resource and power sharing and can I mentor folks?
That's Rachel Fagiano. Rachel's an avid hiker, mountaineer, rock climber, and ice climber based in New York City. They have a career background in racial justice, and now their work focuses on creating safe and welcoming environments and improving access to the outdoors for communities that have been traditionally excluded in those spaces. And in 2022, Rachel was a Summit Scholarship recipient for Aconcagua. I'm Angie, and this is See Her Outside, brought to you by the Karen Project and the Summit Scholarship Foundation. We share stories of women, girls, and gender-diverse adventurers to promote belonging and visibility in nature. We hope that this story inspires you to advocate for a more inclusive outdoors. We often picture adventure as something remote, like a snow-covered alpine ridgeline or a cabin in the woods. But what if wildness could begin on a city sidewalk or a subway platform? Rachel's relationship with the outdoors has been shaped just as much by brownstone stairwells as it has by backcountry peaks. Her story is about what happens when we stop waiting for perfect conditions and just start where we are, even if that place is noisy, paved, and surrounded by scaffolding. And it's about how to share the resources that you do have, wherever you are, whenever you are, to help other people find joy and belonging in the wild, too. So, I asked Rachel about how they started to get to know their own inner wild.
I am one of six, mostly boys. I have a traditional Sicilian father, and he did lots of outdoor things with us, but there were certain things that my brothers were encouraged to do that I was not encouraged to do. And then when I became an adult and had my own income, I took a moment to reflect on that, and I was like, wait a second, these rules are made up, and I can actually try some outdoor things. And I was living in New York City at the time, and my friend actually got a Groupon to a local climbing gym, Steep Rock Bouldering, shout out. I don't think the location that I climbed at originally even still exists, and asked me if I would like to join for a day of climbing. And I said, sure, I'm terrified of heights, let's do it. And so we went to the bouldering gym. I immediately freaked out like 3 feet off the ground, full Elvis leg. For those who don't know, that just means really shaking. There may have been some panic tears. Came down and was like, oh my God, I want to do this again. And so that kicked off an experience of trying to find outdoor things to do in New York City. So there's kayaking at Flushing Meadow Corona Park. There's actually a 420-acre lake there that a lot of people don't know about. I would take the train, Metro North, to trailheads or walk from the train to a trailhead. And I started going hiking and really started building up my skills and trying to progress, particularly in climbing. And there was an organization at the time called Discover Outdoors, which does not exist anymore. But they had a Women in the Outdoors week, and they had a climbing component to that where they would pair you with a mentor, and you could work on something that you needed mentorship in. And one of the things I really needed mentorship in was being less of a scaredy cat. And so I got paired with these awesome women who were very patient and would work through fear with me. And one of them was Alexis Krauss, who is the lead singer of the Sleigh Bells and also one of 3 people who started something that was at the time called Young Women Who Crush, but is now called Kinship Climbing Collective, and eventually was like, can I join? Can I mentor? I would love to be part of this. And she said yes. And through that organization met an incredible group of women and genderqueer and trans folks who both like mentored younger folks, but also mentor one another. And they really started to encourage me to pursue the outdoors more and to dream big. And part of that dreaming big was following the Summit Scholarship and applying every year. And then eventually I got the Summit Scholarship, immediately burst into tears when I found out. Could not believe that it was true.
Something that sticks out to me in your story is this willingness to do very scary things. And I think you and I share this affinity for being scared. But it's hard for me to know exactly why people like us love to put ourselves in those almost like panicky moments of, oh, wait, I can't believe I'm actually doing this. Do you know what drew you to that, especially coming from a background where you wouldn't have identified as particularly outdoorsy, and you're in the city and you have these brothers that are being encouraged to do things that you weren't encouraged to do? What do you think it was that made you so attracted to fear through climbing?
Oh, that is a great question. I love a puzzle. And I love a challenge. And I think it hits both of those buttons, right? Of, okay, how can I figure out how to live with this fear in a way that is a little bit more comfortable and rational? I never want to get rid of it, right? Fear is super important in these spaces, but I want to be able to develop the tools to kind of look at it, examine it, be like, is this a rational fear? Is this an irrational fear? And I think I always really enjoy those growing edges, whatever it is, if it's with fear, if it's with skill development, if it's with something that I'm really curious about and know nothing about and want to delve into more. And so I think I keep coming back to those moments because I think a lot of growth happens. I either learn, oh yeah, that is a boundary I can push and feel comfortable with pushing, or no, I don't want to push that boundary. And here's a really good reason why I don't want to do it. And I also think it makes me a better mentor and a better guide to constantly be reckoning with that feeling. I don't know if this is your experience, but my experience has been when people forget that people get scared or there's something to contend with in that space, they're not necessarily as good of a mentor or as good as a skill sharer around that because they can't empathize with, oh yeah, that thing is really scary for that person, even though I do it 10 million times a day. So I enjoy that reminder as well.
You applied for a Summit Scholarship several years in a row, eventually got one. But we're talking about this fear of climbing and being on a rope or bouldering. I think that sometimes there's an even greater fear of sharing your story and getting really vulnerable, which is what applying for a wilderness scholarship makes you do. Like you have to really spill it out there on the paper. What was it like for you applying time and time again, not getting it the first couple of years? What was it like sharing your story in hopes that you would be able to get the opportunity to go on a big expedition?
Oh, I think it actually helped me tell my story in some ways because I find it difficult to talk about myself that way. And kind of to talk about that dream and imaginative space of what could I do if I had a magic wand. I think I've been taught to be very practical in a lot of ways. And so having to rewrite my story over and over again and hone in on like, what is the thing that actually makes me tick in this space? And I think it's a continual process. I think I'm constantly rewriting this, constantly rethinking it and my relationship to outdoor spaces help me continue to solidify my sense of self a little bit. And I will say I have supported a lot of folks in applying for the Summit Scholarship since and helped them with that storytelling. And it's super exciting. A lot of them have actually gotten the Summit Scholarship. There are 2 in this cohort who I'm very excited about. But I think having that skill set and being able to talk about ourselves is something a lot of non-cis men don't learn to do because we don't learn to center ourselves.
Ugh, I could go down a rabbit hole about the importance of sharing your story, which in fact I did a couple episodes ago. Scroll back in your podcast feed to listen to our Pep Talk meets Rant episode on why your voice is crucial in making the outdoors more equitable. Storytelling is central to our missions at both the CAN Project and the Summit Scholarship Foundation. But now, back to Rachel's prep for Aconcagua.
So when I first got the call, it was immediate tears of joy. And then I hung up the phone and I had an oh shit moment because I definitely was like, oh no, imposter syndrome immediately hit. Did I overpromise? What did I do? there is no way I can climb this mountain. And I think, a lot of folks I've talked to who've received summit scholarships, even to other locations, have had a similar thing of, oh no, this is so exciting, but oh my gosh, I don't know if I can do this. And then I immediately called on my family members. I was like, I'm going. I also talked to my boss, who I am very, very lucky to have had. I was like, so I just won this thing and it means I will be gone for a month. How do you feel about that? And she was like, don't worry, we will figure it out. You should do this. So it felt really good to immediately have support from my family and community. And then my next step was, oh no, how do I plan for this? How do I train? And so I did do the Uphill Athlete 24-week expeditionary training plan. And because I don't have easy access to mountains to go do my steep uphill climbs on, it involved a lot of going up and down the stairs in my building. So I live on the 6th floor of an apartment building. The plan says that you can walk up those 6 floors and take the elevator down. And so I would do that for hours at a time. And every single time the super saw me, because I lived next to the super, he would make the same exact joke, which was, there's an elevator right there.
Classic.
For a year. It also involved a lot of heavy pack carries on a treadmill at a 30% incline, on a Stairmaster. My neighborhood has open streets behind my apartment building, so there's about a mile and a half of road with no cars, which is very unusual for New York City. So I would put on my 6,000 meter boots. I would load up my pack with weight, and I would run the streets, and I would do core work in between the running sets. And I would definitely get a lot of really weird looks. But I will say one of the fun things is the community I live in has a very large Nepalese immigrant population, specifically from the Everest region. And so even though there's a huge language barrier, I don't speak the language, there would be a lot of older grandma and grandpas in the neighborhood who would give me nods as I was out there with my pack and my boots on.
Yeah, that's so special. They get it.
Yeah. It was really fun. And then I would have the mentees from Kinship meet up with me for gym sessions or hiking sessions. I would try after work when there was enough daylight, or on weekends, I would go almost every weekend to some of the Catskill Mountains, Adirondacks, to try to get varied terrain training in. And then as we got closer, Hypoxico, shout out to them for giving me a huge discount because they knew I was a scholarship recipient. I rented a high altitude tent from them so that I could sleep at altitude and try to help a little bit with the acclimatization.
Yeah. Were there any benefits that you can think of to training in an urban environment that people might not get if they were just training in the mountains?
Yeah, there was a huge one, and it's the mental game. So I know that big mountains are glamorous and beautiful, but there's also a lot of mental drudgery is the best phrase I can think of for it, in doing a big mountain, because you're doing those double pack carries, right? So you're going from camp 1 to camp 2, you're coming back down, and then you're doing it again. And I think that can be mentally hard because you've seen the thing already. So it's not like the terrain is varied or new when you're doing the second round. You have a little bit of that anticipation of, oh no, I know what's ahead and it's hard. And so having that drudgery of I'm on the treadmill for 3 hours and I need to come up with some mental coping mechanisms for that, I feel like really applied to those moments that felt mentally hard because I was repeating a route and it was physically challenging and people weren't talking because you're at high altitude. So there's not that brain distraction.
Yeah, that's actually such a great point. I think a lot of people are quick to dismiss urban environments and how they can prepare you for, other adventures. I think there's a bit of a stigma out there on, you should just get out there, weekend warrior, find the trails, nothing's holding you back. And it's actually, there's a lot holding people back. And you can still think creatively to fit in those workouts and fit in the preparation you need. So I think that's such a great example.
Yeah, and I will say I did have some privileges, right? Like I had access to a gym, which I know not everyone has. I do have a car, so I was able to get out of the city a little bit easier than if I only had access to public transportation. And that's a fairly new thing in my life. I didn't have a car for a really long time. And I think there's some of the hidden costs that come with that, right? Like trains are expensive, gyms are expensive, equipment access is expensive. But I do think that there's the benefit of, okay, if you can get access to those things, at least in the urban environment, I think it really supported my like mental game development in a way that if I got to go play in the mountains every weekend, that's so much fun. I wish I had that, but also I don't think I would have developed the same coping mechanisms.
Totally. And I wonder too if it was inspiring for people, everyday people in the streets of New York to see you in your mountaineering boots and pack. And maybe it just like planted a seed in there of like, oh, what's that? Cool. Is there anything else you want to share about the preparation period, or would you like to talk about going down there?
There were other ways I got creative too. And for other folks who are thinking about this, like I did some barter trade with people. So for access to some more personal training, access to equipment, I would trade hikes. I would take people out on hikes, which a lot of people in New York City are a little bit afraid to do on their own if they didn't grow up doing it. So I think if some of the financial resources is a barrier, even on the training end, there are some creative ways to work around that. And also, I would be happy to talk to anybody about that if they're like struggling to figure that out.
That's incredible. I think creative resource sharing is sort of like the future of adventure. As time goes on, this idea of adventure seems to get even more and more epic and glamorous. And if you're not doing it without oxygen, doesn't even matter and all of that. So I think the more creative we can get in, hey, I have this resource that can help you, and it looks like you have something that can help me. Let's swap. Love it so much. Can you share about what it was like to actually meet the rest of your team? How did you prepare to be spending 4 weeks on end with strangers in a really difficult environment to even survive in?
I think I went in with a little bit of not ignorance is bliss, but now that I lead expeditions, I see how much work it takes to actually cultivate that team dynamic. And I went into it being like, well, it is what it is. I have no choice on the teammates, so we'll all do our best to get along, which is true and isn't. I think when people are hungry, they're tired, their bodies are exhausted. You can have as much goodwill in the world as you want, but it still will take some work to maintain that and cultivate that in a team. I did not prepare. It was the short answer. It's just like, well, it'll be what it is.
I just recertified my wilderness first responder last week, and the instructor, she was this rad woman, and she brought up something I had never thought about before, and I have been reflecting on it since. She said that we all have basically the pokey things, the triggers in group dynamics. And if we pay attention to ourselves as outdoor leaders, we know these. We know that there are certain types of personalities in big groups that are just going to irk us. We know that there are certain ways we don't like being talked to. She really honed in on that importance of know thyself and know when you're in a big group dynamic, especially in a situation like an emergency or some sort of tense environment, know what more challenging sides of you are going to come out so that you can try and like tamp them down. And for me, I really started reflecting on this, and I was like, you know what? I do get defensive when like this type of person tries to tell me what to do. Or I notice that I tend to shut down and not want to ask questions when this type of person is talking. And to me, that blew my mind, because this is such an integral part of expeditions is teamwork. And all of us definitely have elements of our personality that are kind of like going to hinder that teamwork. You know what I mean? Did you know any of that about yourself going in? Like, were you anticipating like, hey, here's where I know I struggle being on a mountain with a bunch of strangers and knowing that we're all trying to do something really difficult that only the tiniest fraction of people are ever going to do?
I was reflecting as you were talking about this concept, and I know that's something I struggle with, and it's been solidified for me actually after Aconcagua, is around team dynamics of wanting to be the person who does a lot of the work around the culture, and that sometimes getting in the way of self-care. And I think on a large mountain like Aconcagua, the way that that can show up, I'm not sure if it showed up on Aconcagua. I feel like you'd have to ask my teammates about that. I tried to do a really good job and be really mindful about self-care because I knew that it wasn't going to happen otherwise. But I do think the type of personality that I find hard, but also encounter all of the time is the personality that's like very focused on the summit. I do not get summit fever, maybe to a fault. I am definitely the person who's like, I'm so lucky to be here. I'm going to get as far as my body allows. And once it doesn't allow it anymore, cool, we're done. um, and I think I struggle with the person who's like, we all have to do this no matter what. And because in my brain, I'm like, the mountain will still be there. That's fine. I don't have to do that, you know? And so trying to balance those energies, because I do think that there is a benefit in having that, like, super motivated. I want to get to the summit. I want to get to the summit. And then there's a tipping point of actually, this isn't a helpful energy anymore. And so I think that's the kind of personality that, again, I encounter it so often. I think it's really normal in the outdoors. And also I try to really push back against that culture because I don't think it serves a lot of people.
Rachel got to experience this mindset in action on Aconcagua, a mountain in Argentina. This is the tallest peak in the Americas, with the summit sitting at 22,838 feet. The Summit Scholarship Foundation provides scholarships for transformative outdoor experiences, like climbing Aconcagua. And our volunteers at the Cairn Project, our trailblazers, turn their own personal adventures into grassroots fundraisers to make those scholarships possible. Go to the show notes to learn about both organizations, but for now, let's go on an audio journey to Aconcagua.
I feel like Aconcagua was a completely transformative experience for me. I learned a lot about myself. I think a big part of what I learned is that I am way more capable than I give myself credit for. I think there was a lot of self-talk coming up to the expedition, even though I had put in a lot of the work. And I knew I was deserving of the scholarship because I got it. Have to remind myself of that, that I didn't know how I would perform until I'm on the mountain. And I think that's true for almost everyone I've talked to who's won one of these scholarships. Is they get it and then they're like, okay, but how am I actually going to perform? And I will say in my case, I felt like I outperformed my expectations. I made it all the way to about 21.5, which is the highest I've ever been, higher than a lot of people have been. I felt super proud about that. I will say a highlight actually for me, so just going to the story of Summit Day, because I think it illustrates this for me at least, is it felt like an hour in, but I feel like Sunny would be able to tell you that it was either more or less, because I feel like when you're at that altitude, your perceptions of time are really skewed. For the listener who might not know, when you're at Camp 3, which is at 19,600 feet, it can take like 20 minutes to put your shoes on because you're so hypoxic. And so things just process a little bit differently. Time processes a little bit differently. At least that was my experience. Let's say an hour or a couple hours into Summit Day, all of a sudden, I could not tell the difference between the sky and the ground. I realized that I was starting to develop some pretty significant signs of altitude sickness. And so I let my team know, and I was asked if I could push to that point, the 21.5, about roughly, because that was the designated turnaround point. And on a big mountain, getting to that designated turnaround point is important so that if other people need to turn around, you can do it as a group, and folks don't need to kind of split up the team in a way that'll make it really hard for other people to continue. And I said yes, as long as I have a spot and I can check in with you all. And then when we made it there, one of the things I'm most proud of is that even though I was very confused about where the sky was, I made the personal call to call my expedition for me. And that was my personal summit. And I feel very proud that even when my brain was doing really funky things, I could still do the risk assessment of, all right, cool, I have made it really far, and this is a great time for me to turn around. And I think learning pride in that skill was a really big takeaway, and hopefully being able to share the pride of that, because I feel like when we talk about big mountains, we often talk about the summit or these big heroic rescues, but some of those heroic, brave moments are those small personal ones. And I kind of wish we told those stories more about people's decision making and the ways those moments should be celebrated as well. I think another thing I took away was that there were a lot of barriers for me to get to Aconcagua, and I didn't want there to be as many barriers for other folks. So how could I start mentoring people more formally? How could I become a guide and try to break down some of the barriers in the outdoors? And that really started me on this journey of now guiding for a bunch of different companies all over the US, doing this more full time. So I feel like that was transformative in that I left a career of 15 years after that experience.
Oh, let's talk about that. What was your career before, if you don't mind sharing? And in those years of your older career, had you ever imagined yourself becoming a guide? Was this something that seemed reasonably within possibility, or do you think that your expedition really changed your trajectory?
Oh, hell no. I did not think about it before the expedition. That was a complete change. My career before, so I worked in the philanthropic sector. I worked for about 6.5 years on prison reform, migration detention reform, and with gang members in Central America. And then I worked for about 7 years helping run a racial and economic justice portfolio at a foundation, running a social justice fellowship, and then doing shareholder activism. So very different fields.
Knowing what you know now, like gathering all these experiences outdoors and being a leader outdoors, does it teach you anything about what you were doing in your old career? Are there any sort of transferable lessons from these adventures that are changing the way that you see your former work?
I think they're both really interconnected. So a lot of what I was focused on was justice in various forms, including intersectional justice and understanding systemic barriers and interpersonal barriers. And I think that translates really well to some of the work in trying to make the outdoors a more accessible place for folks. And then some of that interpersonal work that happens on expeditions that I'm leading, where it's like, how do you support people in their own personal growth, manage team dynamics, support people in pushing both of those. And I think honestly, working in like very political, very dangerous in a different way environments really primed me for some of that. And I think helped with some of the steady state that I try to bring to those experiences, and also developed empathy in a way where I think it's really important to have in expeditions and outdoors, where your edge might not be my edge, but that doesn't in any way invalidate either of our edges. Right? And then how do we work with that?
Despite the similarities in impact, the nuts and bolts of Rachel's work changed a lot when she decided to shake up her career after returning from Aconcagua. Like, Rachel dove in. Now, they guide for Good Trip Adventures, an inclusive and eco-friendly company in the southwestern United States. In Alaska, they install the National Outdoor Leadership School, and they guide around Denali through Indigo Alpine Guides, a queer-friendly guiding company. This fall, Rachel's joining Dreamland Safari Tours to guide in the Paria River Canyon. They just became a wilderness medicine instructor with Backcountry Pulse, which is a wilderness medicine company that is people-centered and equity-focused. And to top it all off, Rachel is a program director at Rise Outside in New York City, helping women, BIPOC, and queer people get into outdoor guiding to diversify the guiding profession. Yes, this is all just one person doing all of that badass alert. So it seems to me that the through line between most of your work is connecting. It's this beautiful blend of outdoor passion and empowerment and also activism. You're mixing in change and advocacy and communities who might not have had the resources to go out and do what you did. So I have a double question for you as somebody in that area. One, have you seen any really great examples of progress in this world? Have you seen the outdoors become more inclusive through certain tools or practices or standards that are evolving? And then also, like, what could we be doing better? How can a lot of organizations and even wilderness medicine organizations, how can the outdoor industry as a whole be more inclusive and welcoming to all communities?
So the immediate thing that comes to mind with that question right now is funding. So there are tons of affinity organizations in the outdoors that have developed over the years, and that's really exciting to see. I think the growth in those organizations in recent years is particularly exciting. And it's what's exciting about that for me is communities being able to do things for their own communities and having that self-determination and agency rather than organizations creating a space or a carve out for an affinity group or identity. I think what a lot of organizations are facing right now in the current political context, both in terms of like federal and government funding, but also in terms of a lot of companies that had made commitments, let's say in 2020, towards providing funding for more of these organizations in the affinity space are starting to pull back that funding. There are a couple of corporations that have actually doubled down, and that's super exciting, but a lot of them have pulled out. And so these organizations who've started to build this great infrastructure to bring more folks outdoors, to create pathways for more diverse leaders in the outdoors, are facing a serious moment right now where they might not be able to continue their work. So I think like the immediate need is if you have the ability to, if you have corporate matching at your job, if you know of grants, like get that money to those organizations.
Knowing in our community through the Cairn Project and through the Summit Scholarship Foundation, we have a lot of individuals who feel that need and want for individual action. How can I leave this outdoor adventure world better than I found it? How can I make the outdoors more accessible for other people who might be like my former self, right? That's what a lot of our community wants to do is they think about their past self from, say, years or decades ago, and they wish that adventure had been more accessible to that version of themselves. And so now they're able to use the resources that they do have to go out on an adventure that gives back, or like you go on a life-altering adventure and then making a huge career pivot and now giving your resources to a bunch of organizations that really need it. For the average person listening, for the average trailblazer at the Cairn Project, how can they start to think about using their resources wisely, using their time, maybe funding, creativity, connections, network? How can they use those resources in a creative way to incite change if they can't, give up everything for adventure, if they have a job that keeps them stuck in an office or a restaurant most of the day, if they can't get out into the Catskills, they don't have a car, et cetera? Like, what do we do? What are ways that we can start thinking creatively about what we do have to make a difference?
Yeah, when I think about resource sharing, I also think about power sharing. And I think in the outdoors, there's a lot of gatekeeping that happens either around places that are accessible to get to, skills, having someone to go outside with so that you feel less scared and you have some safety in numbers or community. And so I also think in my personal life about that resource and power sharing, and can I mentor folks in, again, whatever outdoor pursuit they want, or in getting that scholarship, right? So helping them think about what is your dream? How can I support you with those skills? Is the skill I can support you with like, okay, I am not the hardest rock climber in the world, right? I am a snow human. So if snow and mountaineering is not your thing, awesome. Do I have a friend who's a badass rock climber that I can recommend you go climb with? Can I recommend you to an affinity space so that you can find community? Right? For me, I don't think I would be in this space without my community. Actually, I know I wouldn't be in this space without my community. And having a space to feel like I can ask questions, I can learn. I can cry on a cliff edge for an hour because I'm scared, even though it's really dumb that I'm scared because I'm so safe, right? I've definitely had friends who laugh at me, like sat at the top of the cliff laughing at me while I tried to lower myself into a rappel because I was terrified because I had to step over an edge. And they just made fun of me. Friendly bullying works really well in my case. And so just having that one patient human who's like, yeah, I'm going to bully you in a like loving way from the top of this, whatever works for you. I realize that doesn't work for everybody, but I really think about that like individual community sharing aspect of it. Or, okay, cool. I have 2 backpacks. I have 2 mountaineering axes. I know someone who really wants to go outside and try this thing, but they can't afford a mountaineering axe. Awesome. You can borrow mine. I don't care. So there's also that kind of resource sharing. And then I think another resource sharing is what are the ways that you can access the outdoors if you don't have a car, let's say. So great. I can create a map or a list of like all the train stops that you can take and what are the trailheads at those train stops, or point you to a resource if it already exists. And then I will say one other thing that I've been doing that I really appreciate having the platform for is doing some like public education courses in the city. So I've done a couple of series with Arcturix around like getting stoked on snow and ice when you live in New York City. Like, what do you wear if you want to go winter hiking? Because I think a lot of us have been taught when it's winter, don't go outside. So there are things like that too, that if you do have a platform, so for instance, if you are a trailblazer, like, is there a community space that you can go to do some skill sharing? And can you do it for folks who might not be necessarily in the outdoors? So Arcturix is awesome because it's geared towards the outdoors community, but then there's a community bookstore in my neighborhood that I'm in conversation with to do like a wilderness medicine workshop because it applies really well to like protest medicine as well.
Okay, I hope you are also taking notes on that one. But don't worry, you'll be hearing a lot more from Rachel this year as they continue making an impact through the Cairn Project. I think that this is the coolest. Years ago, Rachel was the recipient of a Summit Scholarship, and now she's giving that back by fundraising for other Summit Scholarships through the Cairn Project's Trailblazer program. This is reciprocity. This is why our programs matter. This is how we keep the outdoor world thriving, not just by going on big adventures, but by circling back and making space for somebody else to get outdoors too. To me, that's what real adventure is. Setting out to do hard but joyful work to build a world that we all belong in. So thank you to Rachel for doing just that. If you want to support the mission of the Alliance for Gender Equity in Outdoor Adventure, I'll give you several options. 1, you can apply to become a trailblazer through our program, the Cairn Project. Trailblazers design an adventure fundraiser that crowdfunds scholarships for the Summit Scholarship Foundation. Go to www.cairnproject.org to learn more. 2, you can spread the word about the Summit Scholarship Foundation to help us advance gender equity on and off the mountain. Check it out at www.summitscholarship.org. And 3, you can share the See Her Outside podcast with a friend. Every single share, 5-star review, or comment helps us share stories to get more girls and women outside. See Her Outside is hosted by me, Angie Marie, and edited by Allison Castonguay, with research by Danielle Peacher. Until next time, go get outside.